Hello and welcome to my Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia review. Thrones of Britannia was released on the 3rd of May 2018 and is developed by Creative Assembly and published by Sega. The first installment of a new sub-franchise, Total War Sagas, are smaller in scope than their mainline Total War counterparts. As a result, they focus in on a shorter time span and a smaller geographical area, with the debut being the British Isles in the Middle Ages starting 878 AD. Though it is a Total War Saga, the Total War formula as you may know it remains intact. It's an open-ended sandbox strategy game with a turn-based campaign combined with real-time battles. There's 10 playable factions, 2 English, 2 Welsh, 1 Irish, 1 Scottish, and 4 types of Vikings. And as with many recent Total War games, you can play single player in the campaign or with a friend in either co-op or head-to-head campaigns. And there's also online multiplayer battles. To set the scene, the Great Viking army invaded around 10 years prior to the game's start, and King Alfred defeated them. Now there's an uneasy truce between the Vikings and the English. The Welsh, the Scots and the Irish are sidelined slightly, but they have their own smaller Viking raids to deal with while also trying to unite their kingdoms. And that pretty much sets the stage for Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia. The campaign aspect of Thrones of Britannia is extremely familiar for fans of the franchise. You own settlements that earn money, and then with that money you recruit and sustain armies that allow you to take more settlements. The end goal being your victory conditions, which are split into short, long, and ultimate victories to give you a bit more freedom with how long you want your campaign to last. Each culture group has their own sort of unique resource that they can earn or work towards. The Viking Sea Kings can build up tribute by winning battles and raiding, allowing them to send off an expedition through an event dialogue. Gaelic kingdoms earn legitimacy, which allows them to annex other factions diplomatically. These are all minor mechanics, but they give a bit of flavor to each group to make the faction feel slightly different. As we move on in the review, I'm going to be separating economic, military, and political aspects of the campaign so we can get an idea of how each plays and how they work together. Then after that, we'll take a look at the battle side of things. In Total War games, the thing you usually do the most is manage settlements and grow your economy. It's the backbone of the game, and it allows you to get into a position where you can fight great battles. In Thrones of Britannia, the settlement management is extremely simplified, and to the game's detriment. Let's start with provinces. A province is made up of to 5 regions. One of these regions is always the province capital, and this is always a walled settlement. The outer regions are always unwalled and undefended. These are called minor settlements. The minor settlements are associated with a resource type, which are nicely color-coded: green for farm, purple for church, black for industry, and yellow for market. 4 colors, 4 types of building. All of these provide income. None of them can possibly cost you any money to maintain. When you build them, they just produce income. They are strictly beneficial. You can't go wrong with them. The black type building or industry can have a negative effect on public order. That's the only negative that you ever have to think about when it comes to settlements. Now, an important aspect of this is that minor settlements are predetermined and that they can never be changed. So if a minor settlement is a farm, then it's always a farm, no matter what. The only changes you do with these minor settlements are direct upgrades. Each of them can be upgraded to level 5. These upgrades are not hindered by anything. You don't require a technology, you don't require a bigger city, or a resource or anything to upgrade them. You always just require a bit more money. And you can build up to level 5, even if the city in the province is level 1. So let's reiterate that for a moment, because I know it gets a little bit granular, but I'm building to something, so stick with me. Let's say you take a minor settlement. There's no defense, so it's an instantaneous capture. You don't have a say in what it is, it's already predetermined. It always produces income, you can upgrade at any time, and it will just produce more income. If it's a black type, it might affect your public order. So that's the minor settlements done. Now the city gives you a little bit more freedom. There's 6 slots in a city, 1 reserved for the type of city it is, and the second slot is for the port if there is one. And a new color is now introduced that you don't find in the minor settlements: red for military. So if you get a red city, that's a military city, no matter what, you cannot change it. Now whatever the city type is, be it red, yellow, or whatever, this will allow you to build around 2 buildings of that type in the city that you wouldn't otherwise get. Okay, so I hope you're keeping up, so I'll give you an example of what all of this information now means. At Aircarden in Scotland, you get a red city and you get a green and purple minor settlement. Remember, you can't change that, so it's the same for you as it is for me. You have 5 slots to play around with to customize it because the city doesn't have a port. Because we have a green and purple income buildings, we need green and purple city buildings. As I mentioned, they are modifiers. If we got different colors, those buildings wouldn't really do anything. Because it's a red city, you should also build some red buildings if you want. So I've built 2 green modifiers, 1 purple modifier and 1 red building, just because I could. The red building provides 2 public order, but my public order is 28 more than it needs to be already. So because I can't change what goes where, because nothing has a negative effect, because the city is largely decided for me, all I have to do in any province is say, what's the color on the right? Okay, I'll match that color on the left. That's it. You don't do anything else, and if you do, you're actually doing it wrong. I've gotten in the habit of pressing the full stop key just to iterate through my towns and upgrade everything each turn, by just matching the colors. The system is completely devoid of any thought, strategic depth, or personality. It's honestly like some sort of mobile game where you just match the colors and hit upgrade every turn. There's literally no other way to build that settlement that I've just shown you that would make any sense. There's no growth factor, no population, religion, culture, there's no real governance with it. It's just an empty vessel for income. I don't even need to see the names of buildings or what they do. You just gotta match the colors and hit upgrade. Now I'll be honest, in my first campaign I didn't even notice that this was the case. I was reading every building, thinking what we needed to go where, but as soon as it clicked and I realized that it's basically just color matching, my income and public order exploded. Now if you're wondering, but what about the black industry buildings? How do you manage those? They have negative public order. It's simple. Just build a church and it'll sort itself out. Here's a province with 2 black industry buildings in it. I have a 15 public order surplus. And when that last slot unlocks there, it'll be a food modifier building to match the food and the province will be done. So trying to be objective and look at the benefits of this system, I feel like its simplicity is perfect for people that just hate city management or economy management in strategy games. I could see a situation where maybe you're a dad playing with a son and the kid doesn't really understand or want to read anything, and you can just tell him, hey, just build a green thing and everything will actually work out okay, because it is that simple. And I'm not being sarcastic. If I had a kid, I think this would be a pretty good first step into learning management, maybe. And I'm talking about 7 or 8 years old, by the way. Now, if you're someone who just doesn't want to think about their buildings, it's good too. You can just largely ignore the province management side of things. But for someone like me who's played every entry in the series and much more complex games, there's just not enough management here and I form no attachment to the world at all. Now, a benefit you may assume is that the AI would utilize it extremely well and build really strong provinces and economies because it's so simple. Unfortunately, no. The AI doesn't seem to understand this color matching rule at all. Often, I'll take provinces that they've built up and see that they've built buildings that have zero benefit and often even hurt themselves. Here in West Sussex, they've built and upgraded 3 times a tool maker's industry. This gives you a 30% income from tools and 20% income from industry just in this province. This province only has farms, nothing else, and it can't have anything else either. There will never be industry here. I mean, now I'm sorry, but that just screams complete laziness. A simple script or a little programming time should be able to prevent that kind of thing from happening so easily. It's as if the AI is just building randomly and hoping something works. There's not much else to say about the economy. Public order is pretty simple to manage. It uses a surplus system now that if you go under creates a chance of rebellion, which I actually really like. It lets you live a little bit more dangerously and maybe raise the taxes to chance a rebellion rather than just guarantee one. The only thing in my campaigns that ever really affected public order for me was when I recently conquered a town. So after that wore off over time, rebellions basically just never happened. One last thing to touch on is the technology tree. Split between military and civic, the tech tree is divided up into smaller linear branches that have an initial requirement to kick it off. While I love the idea of doing a requirement to begin a technology, most of them feel pretty arbitrary, like recruit 10 of a certain unit or win 5 battles. It doesn't really feel like it relates to the technology. The civic side is particularly annoying as it requires you to own and build a city of a certain type, which basically becomes a waiting game until you stumble across them. All factions also obey the same tech tree, and as they're all an extremely linear path, you never really make much decisions with it. Armies rely on 2 things to be sustained, food and gold. Units' gold upkeep will vary depending on the unit, but their food upkeep is a flat number across all units. So whether it's a 160-man axe unit or a 40-man catapult unit, they'll both require the same amount of food per turn. Food doesn't work like gold, however. You don't store it, it's just a surplus. You either have some or you don't. I feel like this is a great idea, but it's just a little bit disconnected and not balanced very well in its current state. In the beginning, you'll be hard pressed to manage it, but essentially every farm produces enough food for one army when it's upgraded. There tends to be quite a lot of farms and city buildings that also produce food, so you never really need to worry about it beyond the first hour or two of your campaign. In terms of it being disconnected, that's twofold. One, armies don't really consume food how you'd imagine. As mentioned, it's a per unit number, not a per man number, so if you have 20 units, about 2,000 men let's say, in an army and 1,000 of them die, the food cost is still the same as long as you still have the 20 units intact. This is actually how gold works as well, and has worked for a long time in Total War, but when it comes to food, it just feels a little bit more out of place that less men don't eat less, or when you're on the verge of starvation and half your army dies, you're still starving, despite there being less men. The second disconnection is tied to a new feature called supplies. An army has a set of supplies that it consumes as it moves around foreign territory. If they run out of supplies, they need to raid or get into friendly territory. Again, I think this is actually a really cool system. In fact, it's probably my favorite new feature to the franchise, but it undermines the food feature, at least from a practical standpoint. If you send an army into foreign territory, they start consuming their supplies. But they also still require food from your farms, even though you're being told that they can't get it. So this just makes food feel like a number to try and keep your unit count down. It doesn't really do that, and it doesn't add immersion because it's not tied to manpower, so it's just kind of there. Just want to reiterate though that supplies in concept is awesome. I sent a big expedition around England and we were running out of supplies fast. We were miles from home territory, so we had to ravage the landscape to sustain ourselves. See, now that's a great feature and a pretty good implementation, and it's something the community has been asking for, so thumbs up for that. It is worth mentioning though that, as with seemingly all mechanics in this game, it's just not balanced very well right now. Unless you pack up and decide to travel very far, which there's usually no reason to do so, you probably wouldn't even know supplies were there. Unit recruitment now works a little bit differently for franchise veterans too. You can recruit anywhere in home territory and recruit any unit you want without any limits apart from what's available. Now the recruitment pool fills up over time based on the rarity of the unit, and technologies and buildings can boost that. This is a great system. It makes losing a unit more risky because you might not get it again for a while. You also can't just spam the highest tier unit if you have a lot of money, so it increases army diversity. Now I'm not sure about the recruit from anywhere aspect or the instantaneous recruitment. That leads to a little bit of gaming the system by both the AI and the player. For instance, you can create a general somewhere, run to an enemy's undefended town, and then spawn 20 units completely miles away from your borders if you wanted. Now you won't get the full army, they replenish over time until the unit gets full, but it still feels wrong that you can own a farm in the back arse of nowhere and raise a full army out of it. It's also frustrating to chase the AI down when they do that. For the glory of the guilds. That's pretty much it for the mechanics related to armies. Armies just have two stances now, raiding and fortify, and when you enter fortify stance there's no defensive bonus or fort on the battle map, so it's basically just a recruitment stance that is poorly named. There are no ambush stances or movement stances, and there's no army leveling system anymore. This won't be missed by newcomers, but it will be missed by veterans. The last thing to mention is how the AI handles armies on the campaign and the type of gameplay you get with armies on the map. Unfortunately again, and this will be a recurring thing, the AI is extremely vacant here. At turn 50 in my campaign there were 6 factions in Ireland fielded by the AI and 6 armies that I could fight. There are 58 settlements in Ireland, so between 58 settlements there was a total of 9 armies if you include my 3. This leaves a lot of empty space. Even though we generally had the same amount of land, the AI mostly only created small armies and occasionally built a full 20 stack. This leads to you auto-resolving against the small armies most of the time, and instantly capturing all the minor settlements as they're ungarrisoned. Now I like the idea of ungarrisoned settlements that have valuable resources, but they're not valuable enough to produce armies to defend them, so it just becomes a really boring slog to capture them. If a gold mine, let's say, supplied enough for a whole army, then there'd be armies all over the place defending resources, and capturing one off the enemy would feel triumphant as you get a huge boost in income. But it's just not balanced in that way, and as such, it becomes really boring. Once I got to turn 100 in my campaign and invaded England, then I finally saw the AI send around 6 army stacks towards me, all of 20 units. Finally, a great big battle was going to be decided at Caer Gwent, and I was rapidly sending over fleets to get there and defend it as fast as I could. They had around 100 units that I could see, and I had 60 with a town garrison, but the attack never came. They sent most of their armies at me one by one, and I finally got bored and just attacked them, which led to a massive cluster battle among a forest, which I'll get to in the battle section. That balanced 4,800 versus 2,400. We just got to separate them down. I do want to have a big battle though, but they just won't really come at me with their armies together properly. There we go. Alright, so that's their king as well. Aethelward, Anglo-Saxons. And I've got 2 more armies coming up. So all the boys are down here. Now it used to be a 3 versus 5. Now it's a 5 versus 3. So we're winning. We're getting them down. We're grinding them down. But I'm hoping we get a big battle out of it. Otherwise, it'd be so disappointing. After those 6 armies were defeated, I never fought another army belonging to them again. Their entire 52 settlements and huge income from having no more armies to pay wasn't enough for the AI to produce a single army against me again. So yeah, unfortunately, I think I can confidently say that the AI just is not working as intended in this game. It doesn't provide a challenge, it doesn't understand buildings, doesn't really attack the player, doesn't build armies when it has money, and it doesn't defend important resources. I played on very hard, and at the end, there's a big invasion of Normans and Norse warriors, and again, the Normans split their 6 stacks up and allowed me to attack them one by one, and the Norse got killed before I even reached them, giving me an ultimate victory. Thrones of Britannia aims to have an increased focus on characters compared to its predecessors in the series. Every faction is a form of monarchy, and as such, the family tree is front and center in the faction screen. Your faction leader is your king, and his children will be heir to the throne, and so on. Each character has influence and loyalty. Influence is basically just how influential they are. The more battles they win, the higher their level, and certain traits cause a character's influence to rise. If a character's influence is higher than the king's, then their loyalty drops. Now if loyalty reaches 0, the character will break away and form a civil war. Loyalty itself is dependent on a few factors, such as their office and their estates. Estates are essentially part of most minor settlements that you capture, and they can be assigned to a character to increase their loyalty. By default, all estates captured belong to the king, and if the king has many estates for himself, the other character's loyalty will suffer as they feel unfairly treated, I suppose. If you are running low on territory, you can build more estates within the Red City chains. For me, estates served almost no purpose. My king has 26 estates to himself, which annoys the crap out of everyone else, but not enough for their loyalty to be low. So again, it's a nice idea perhaps, but one that can be largely ignored. In my second campaign, I chose to stay relatively small, raiding instead of conquering. In that regard, estates were harder to come by, but I still had more than enough for everyone. When you get the message that loyalty is low, you just drag and drop a character onto an estate and it's back to normal. There's no other effects or consequences. So back to the family tree screen. You have certain actions that you can do to change a character's influence or their loyalty. Doing these usually presents you with an event dilemma where you can either pay money or your king's influence for something to get done. Now as I said, my king held 10 to 20 estates, giving him around 40 influence. Most actions cost 1 or 2 influence, so it just was extremely easy to just spend all the influence to make everybody happy. Aside from the males in the family tree, there are also females, both being born and being wed into the family. Women act as modifiers to men. They provide buffs or debuffs depending on their trait, such as increasing loyalty or money or command or whatever. They can also be used in diplomacy to form good relations with another faction. You can both offer and demand a wife. I've never seen the demand available in diplomacy, but when offering my own, factions will pay up to 10,000 gold for them, and their traits don't affect the value, so it's often good to basically just sell a woman if she has no benefits. While we're on the subject of diplomacy, one thing that is sorely missed is the option to trade regions. Because the cities in this game depend on the regions more so than any other Total War game, having it split between you and your allies is extremely annoying for both parties. You can't give them the city and they can't give you the towns, so you're literally forced to go to war with an ally just so the settlements will work properly. It's a huge oversight not to have that in the game. Trade is also absent from diplomacy. Now everyone just trades together unless they're at war. Generally speaking, diplomacy works fine, but it's only ever really used when declaring war or making peace. It's not really diplomacy. Outside the family tree, there's also a random pool of other nobles that you can field if you don't have enough in your family. Often these are used for governorships. For some reason you're limited to 10 governors, but essentially they level up over time and also provide buffs, which brings us to the characters screen. Alongside their influence and loyalty, characters also have a command, governance and zeal categories that scale from 1 to 10. Command gives you some minor battle buffs and gives the general some capabilities in battle. Governance decreases construction costs and corruption, and zeal helps public order and battle stats. As your character ranks up from being a governor or general, he'll get skill points that allow him to get new followers. There are 8 follower types that basically vary between governor buffs, battle buffs, raiding buffs and political buffs, and despite its name it essentially plays like a linear skill tree. Much like buildings, they can be each upgraded 5 times, have no negatives, and often there's only 2 things you want for a particular character. If your character is a governor, there's pretty much no reason to get anything other than scribe, for instance. Something very cool about the characters are their traits, often earned by performing actions, and their appearance. They age over time, and that is visible on both the campaign and in battles. It's a really nice touch to see father and son in battle and be able to clearly differentiate them. Despite me hanging on to a lot of negatives about the campaign, I did actually really enjoy my first one. I hadn't played a Total War game in around 5 months, and I barely knew anything about this one going in. The beginning was slow and it did get a little underwhelming toward the end, but I still had fun. My second campaign is where things started to unravel. I played that one off stream and took the time to learn about the buildings and character systems. I found it really easy to game and really dull. Sudriar felt basically the same as Mead, and the battles became more and more boring. I tried to make it interesting for myself by going on raids in Ireland to embrace the Viking theme, but realized there's not much point because the army upkeep is much higher than sacking a town. You'd need to sack and loot around 1 town every 2 turns to make the raids worth doing it financially, else you'd just be better off disbanding the army. I think the biggest problem isn't necessarily with the simplistic systems. Although that does hurt, I think a lot of the concepts like food, supplies, minor settlements and stuff like that are good, just the AI doesn't really play the game how it should, and it leaves you with nothing to do or an extremely easy and boring experience. The balance of these systems could also be tweaked to increase challenge. I never need to look at the faction screen, diplomacy is redundant and characters aren't unique enough that the skill tree ever needs to be upgraded differently. So I think in summary, a lot of people will get bored of this campaign very quickly, even if you love the era. Moving on to battles, this is where Thrones was most enjoyable for me. I like a heavy focus on infantry, and that's what you get here, as cavalry and special units take on a very limited role. It's all about axes, swords and missiles in Thrones. Unfortunately, while this is right up my alley, after your first campaign you'll have already learned the AI patterns in battle, and battles feel extremely samey to fight. My first few battles felt fresh, the pacing was good and the atmosphere was great, but almost every battle felt the same. You really can have too much of a good thing. I was hoping that the terrain would provide more unique gameplay, but terrain is extremely flat almost all the time, and the AI almost always use the same formation, usually a really long infantry line backed by some missiles. With a stronger focus on characters, I was hoping different characters could use different tactics, like more aggressive, more reserved, more complex formations. But instead, regardless of the faction or the general, they all follow the same pattern. Since there's no ambushes or fort battles and there's no in-battle defenses, it just becomes really dull, unfortunately. I've only had 1 or 2 river battles, and both times the AI just couldn't work out what was going on. This is a replay of a river battle where I'm attacking. They just need to form up in front of that one choke point there, and they never do it. In fact, they kind of bug out. They start running in circles, becoming exhausted. Then I was able to fire at them from across the river, freaking them out even more.
Mission Control, we have a belligerent dumbass here that won't cooperate.
What is it, Total War AI?
Yeah, I'm doing all I can. I'm gonna need you to send me in some backup.
The 10-4, how's it behaving?
I don't know, it's acting sporadic and I don't even know what it is. Sir, ma'am.
Unit collision is a big topic in the Total War community, and it's basically the same as Attila in this game. Troops run through each other and come to an abrupt stop, whether it's infantry or cavalry. It's almost like they don't know there's an enemy in front of them. It doesn't really hurt the actual gameplay, but it just kind of looks wrong. It's hard to come back to this after playing the improved collision of Warhammer 1 and 2. You don't need to have over-the-top reactions and animations, but the actual collision detection and elasticity of the unit, as well as the hierarchy threshold of a unit, is way better in Warhammer. Siege battles in Thrones of Britannia are probably the best types of battles you can fight, mostly due to the excellent looking cities and the amount of variations there are. Settlements are complex, with inner walls, ocean landings, narrow streets, barricades and wide open areas, so everything's in place for really great battles. There are several drawbacks though. Number one is you guessed it, the AI. It doesn't defend well, and it's hard-coded to leave the general back in the town center every single time by himself. Watch what it does with this archer unit in the battle. It's basically defending a side street while it could have been firing on the advancing enemy. They're facing the wrong way the entire battle. The AI builds barricades and then runs around them or doesn't use them, or builds them facing the ocean when all you have is land units. In this combined land and sea siege, the Viking army defending never figured out how to land their own ships until it became too late. There's something really wrong with the AI in this game.
See, they flee before our might.
The settlement design, while big and beautiful, feels like it's for 10 to 15,000 men to fight in, when in reality, you typically fight with around 3,000 to 5,000 at most. It's far too big for the armies to fight for them in the campaign. For instance, there's a river on one side of this settlement, but no attacker would ever choose to come across that way. You'd only ever do it if you had such a big army that you needed the space to come in that way, or to divide up the enemy's defenses and attention. It's just a shame that this area will never really be used in the campaign. Now this goes back to how I mentioned resources need more value. If we were fielding a full army for almost every region, you could pack these settlements with troops and have massive complicated fights. But as I said, the game just isn't balanced for that, and the AI can't seem to do it anyway. In multiplayer, however, I played multiple sieges, both combined land and sea, where I asked people to take the maximum number of units to really stress test the cities. I can't speak for them, but I had an absolute blast in those battles. They were some of the most engaging battles I've played in Total War in a long time. In this one, I was defending the walls at 2 points and being attacked at 3. I ended up having to fall back to the center, but managed to get a victory in the end. It was intense, unpredictable, and the whole settlement practically was used. This really shows that it's not necessarily the design that's at fault, or the settlements, but again the AI that doesn't provide circumstances on the campaign to encourage this to happen. And in the rare case that it does, typically goes something wrong in the battle where they don't coordinate the defense properly.
The enemy is at the walls!
Something that was also really enjoyable for me was the naval battles. There are no navies in Thrones of Britannia, just naval transports, so all the naval combat is done by boarding enemy ships. This still uses the weird 20-foot jumps from Total War Rome 2 instead of any proper boarding systems with ropes and planks, but for the most part, the gameplay still works. I just think that they nailed the atmosphere here, with bells ringing, troops shouting, ships burning and sinking, and people jumping into the ocean. It really felt like a clash at sea. Now it can be a bit buggy with ships passing through each other or ships getting stuck on each other occasionally, which isn't to be excused, but for some reason I just really enjoyed the wider ships and the bigger naval battles. The AI never noticeably made any glaring mistakes here, and usually performed pretty well, keeping missiles back and engaging 2v1 ships where they could. These engagements are much rarer too, but I like that. They break up the monotony of the land battles, and taking casualties is much more significant in naval battles, as usually the whole unit dies if the ship sinks. They definitely aren't perfect, but in small doses, these naval battles can be a lot of fun.
The enemy general is dead!
Something Thrones of Britannia does exceptionally well is battle atmosphere. The sounds, the chants, the environments, and the music look and sound brilliant. As mentioned just now with naval battles, the bells ringing, the gurgling of the ships sinking, fire and smoke and waves crashing with shields glistening in the rain just looks so damn good. The lighting in siege and land battles looks fantastic, with foggy sunsets and dull cloudy days really bringing the British Isles to life. Night battles are a bit underwhelming, they don't really look like nighttime, but for fun, you can throw down the gamma really far, and it's actually a really fun experience. You won't know what's going on, but I really had a lot of fun with that, and it was super immersive.
Our general is under attack.
The models of troops in battle look appropriately Viking themed, and late tier units start fielding more recognizable medieval weaponry, such as kite shields and nasal helmets.
See, they flee
One thing to
before
note, however, is that there are no new animations in this game at all from what I could tell. Everything is straight out of Total War Rome 2 or Total War Attila. Some people might not care about this, and if you haven't played those other two games, you shouldn't care. But something I've always enjoyed is finding little pockets of combat and going, wow, look at what he's doing, or look how these guys are fighting it out. But for me, I'm seeing the same fights I saw 5 years ago across multiple games, so it's just getting a little bit tiresome. Blood is sorely missing from the game too. This game is a war conquest game with Vikings, and there's no blood. It's a little bit ridiculous that there's drowning and burning to death, but no blood. On the campaign, I haven't personally been as wowed as with later installments in the franchise. The British Isles look appropriately gloomy, but I found that adding a little bit of color correction to it just makes it look far more appealing to me at least. There are historic landmarks dotted around the map, and the actual map artwork looks beautiful as well. Something I personally really don't like is a portion of the UI. I mean, the unit icons and the panels on the campaign look and feel great and are very fitting of the time period, but the settlement icons and the army banners just look absolutely awful in my opinion. Your screen is constantly filled with circles everywhere, and it just feels like it clashes heavily with the backdrop of the campaign. In battle, it's the same. The icons of troops, while pretty easy to read, completely clash with the feel of the game and are quite badly designed for gameplay. For instance, by default, all units have a faction icon and a class icon above them, with separate health and ammo and effect icons. Now, why you ever need to see your own faction icon or the enemies is completely beyond me. You're the yellow player, they're the red player, you should know who you are and who they are. It's extremely rare to ever fight two different types of enemies, and I actually never have in any of my campaigns yet. Now luckily, you can remove the faction icon to just have the unit class, but that means you can no longer click the units by their icons. It turns out that clicking icons only works on the faction symbol, not on the unit class. If you want to remove statuses and keep health, then you have a weird layout on your screen, as it seems to be modular but not dynamic, so it's not really implemented that well in my opinion. Worse yet, if your unit is behind a tree, then the icon is also behind the tree. The UI should be Z-axis independent, but it isn't. It's actually in the world, so to speak, and when I had a massive forest fight, it was nearly impossible to see anything that was happening. So in terms of readability and clicking units, I just feel like the in-world UI on both the campaign and battle is horrible. But the panels and borders is probably the best it's ever been. For me, Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia has generally been a bit of a disappointment. While quite good and engaging the first few hours with my campaign, the systems broke down due to poor AI performance and limited depth to the mechanics on both the campaign and in battle. I commend Thrones for trying something new on the campaign. The addition of supplies, food and estates was welcome, but its balance never really encouraged use of those systems to their full potential. The rework of characters, provinces, war weariness and army mechanics ultimately provides you with less to do and less to think about, limiting the sandbox nature of the game, making each campaign feel very similar, hurting replayability. Thrones of Britannia is just on the cusp of being an okay game as it stands, but in terms of the franchise, it offers the smallest amount of content to date at a pretty substantial price point. That's it for the review of Total War Saga Thrones of Britannia. Please let me know what you think of the game and the review in the comments below, and if you want, you can vote in the YouTube card poll to see what other people think of that score. And as always, thank you very much for the support over on Twitch and Patreon. It's really been incredible and it just keeps getting better and better. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.